There's only been one Blade. There's only ever going to be one Blade.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Cosmic Breakdown. We just saw Avengers Doomsday Chair Watch. The chairs have come and gone, but with good news also comes bad news. And it sounds like Marvel has finally officially canceled the Blade movie. There was a question as to whether or not it might wind up surviving all the cancellations that have been happening the last couple of years. Marvel seems like it's trying to race to the finish here with the multiverse saga, Avengers Doomsday, Avengers Secret Wars, so they can get to this soft reboot point heading into Marvel Phase 7. In the X-Men, the mutant era of the MCU as fast as possible. But if you remember, they first announced the Blade movie at Comic-Con 2019. It's been that long. It seems like it's been an eon since they announced it. Why has it been so hard for them to make that movie? Why do they keep ice skating uphill? Everybody looking at you. Marvel asking, why is it so hard to make a movie about a dude killing vampires? We've got Wesley Snipes on the line. He has opinions on you attempting to create a Blade film without his involvement. Meanwhile, throughout this process, Ryan Reynolds, since working on and launching Deadpool and Wolverine, has been pushing Marvel to produce a Logan-style farewell film for Snipes' iteration of Blade. Essentially, he wants to see Snipes get another movie, or at least be included in one, giving him the proper send-off for the role that he never received back then. So the chairs giveth, and the chairs taketh away. You can kind of see Marvel's strategy for dropping big news. Here's something exciting to grab your attention. All these Avengers Secret Wars bombshells about returning actors, a wave of classic X-Men characters making a comeback, even Channing Tatum's Gambit finally getting his moment thanks to Deadpool and Wolverine. The X-Men lineup that Ryan Reynolds practically manifested into reality. Kevin Feige had no plans for Channing Tatum's Gambit before Deadpool and Wolverine. It was only after being on that set that he got really hyped about the character's potential. So now, there's a strong possibility he's having the same change of heart about Wesley Snipes' Blade, but not all hope is lost. Even if the new Blade movie with Mahershala Ali doesn't happen, it looks like Marvel is actively working on a Midnight Suns project, a team-up of supernatural characters who likely won't get much focus during Avengers Secret Wars and Avengers Doomsday. For example, everyone's been asking, where was Moon Knight during all those big announcements? Well, there's a chance we won't see much of him in the next two Avengers films, because Marvel could be holding on to the character for a different supernatural-based team-up. Kevin Feige mentioned that they're also developing different kinds of teams because the comics have so many iconic groups. There are a lot of great characters who might not fit into the traditional Avengers crossover films, but Marvel still wants to find a place for them. But you probably noticed that Marvel recently wiped the Blade movie from their release schedule entirely. This is them finally admitting defeat, acknowledging that they couldn't land on a solid enough story within the next few years. If they were close, they would have just pushed it back by a few months or maybe a year, but that didn't happen. They completely removed it. Originally, Blade was set for a November 2025 release. It was already clear they wouldn't make that deadline, so a delay seemed inevitable. But instead of rescheduling, they scrapped it from the lineup altogether. There were at least 2 open slots in 2026 or 2027 where Marvel could have placed Blade. Right now, the only films officially scheduled for those years are Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars. So if they were still serious about making Blade, they had plenty of room to shift it around. Instead, they wiped it from the schedule entirely and then added 3 mystery movies to 2028 after Secret Wars. It really seems like they're moving on, like they've decided, you know what, let's just not do the Blade movie. Maybe someday, like 50 years from now, they'll finally figure it out. So, RIP to Mahershala Ali's Blade movie, pour one out. Every day, Marvel is making that Deadpool and Wolverine Wesley Snipes Blade joke feel more and more real. What makes it even funnier is that there actually was another Blade. Sticky Fingaz played him in a TV series, so technically Wesley Snipes wasn't the last live-action Blade. But the whole joke in Deadpool and Wolverine seems to be pretending that never happened, like Snipes and Ryan Reynolds are just collectively agreeing, nope, there was no Blade TV show. We don't know what you're talking about. You might even remember that X-Men 97's disgraced former showrunner Beau DeMayo was actually hired to write an early version of the Blade movie a few years back, long before his fallout with Marvel and sudden firing. He claimed that in just 3 months, he wrote 3 full drafts and a dozen outlines. His favorite concept was a raid-style story where Blade is trapped in a rundown tenement, protecting a group of humans from Varney's vampire hordes until sunrise. Varney, for those who don't know, is a villainous vampire from the Doctor Strange comics. So, it was meant to be a big Marvel crossover story. DeMeo said the entire movie would unfold over a single night, with Blade discovering, through one of the tenants, Jericho Drum, aka Brother Voodoo, why Varney is attacking. Turns out one of the female tenants, who Blade takes a liking to, has been magically impregnated with Lilith. And the twist? The other tenants are actually Darkhold cultists who orchestrated the whole thing. So, he described the movie as 30 Days of Night meets Rosemary's Baby, except the baby is Lilith. In the final act, Blade is forced to make a choice. What to do with the woman and her unborn child, Lilith, to prevent the mother of evil from falling into Varney's hands. As the first vampire arrives to kidnap her, Jericho Drum brings out some old voodoo artifacts to help Blade defeat Varney. But before DeMeo could refine the script further, he was fired from the project. It sounds like the ending left Blade with a difficult decision regarding his love interest, who remains unnamed, and her unborn child. Based on what DeMeo implied, Blade ultimately chooses not to kill Lilith while she's still in the womb, meaning both the mother and the baby would have survived, setting up potential sequels. Yeah, it's almost like a Grogu Mandalorian dynamic, but way darker. Blade would essentially become the Mandalorian, stuck raising a child who is technically Lilith, the mother of evil, while constantly questioning whether she'll eventually embrace her dark nature. It's like if The Mandalorian was less about protecting Grogu from the Empire and more about Din Djarin worrying every day that Grogu might turn into the next Darth Sidious. Overall, it sounds like a solid pitch for at least the first Blade movie, depending on where they wanted to take the story in the future. But obviously, that's not happening now. Marvel fired DeMeo a while back and moved on to a completely different storyline. There were also a couple of other versions of the film that focused on Blade's daughter, but none of those made it to production either. Kit Harington's Black Knight was actually supposed to return in an earlier version of the Blade movie that focused on Dracula. He would have been wielding the ebony blade in full Black Knight armor in the present day. That was the whole point of the Eternals post-credits scene. It was setting up his team-up with Blade. In fact, that scene was Mahershala Ali's first, and so far only, appearance as Blade in the MCU. Kevin Feige deserves credit for being a good sport about people constantly joking and clowning on him, especially Ryan Reynolds in Deadpool and Wolverine, taking shots at all the behind-the-scenes chaos at Marvel. But to their credit, Marvel is still bringing back Mahershala Ali as Blade, even if the movie itself is still a giant question mark. In Marvel Zombies, Blade actually takes over as the new Moon Knight because Mark Spector is killed in that universe. So Khonshu just moves down the roster and picks Blade as his next avatar. That's why you see him in the Marvel Zombies trailer. He's literally the new Moon Knight. We'll get those episodes later this year, but it's funny to think about how long they've been sitting on this idea. That Eternals post-credits scene felt like it was setting up something big, but now it seems like Marvel wasn't entirely sure what they were doing with Blade from the start. One of the early plans was to reveal that Blade had encountered the Ebony Blade much earlier in his life. One version of the movie was going to include flashbacks to the 1920s, and even earlier, exploring the history of the blade through the Black Knight lineage, showing different ancestors who wielded it all the way back to Camelot. At one point, Black Knight had a major role in the film, but in later versions, they scrapped him entirely, and just kept the ebony blade itself as part of the story. There was also a version of the movie where Lilith appeared in the past, back when the story was set in the 1920s. In that version, she was trying to take control of the ebony blade. The idea was to use that as a setup, carrying the storyline into the present day, creating a clear connection between the Ebony Blade and the Midnight Suns movie Marvel had been planning for a while. Since then, though, the Blade project has gone through countless writers and rewrites over the years. And apparently, Mahershala Ali just hasn't been satisfied with any of them. So, if it wasn't obvious, Mahershala Ali has actually been the main reason for the delay. He's holding out for what he feels is the perfect Oscar-worthy Blade movie. You wouldn't think it'd be that hard to make a movie about a guy killing vampires, but he wants an S-tier prestige version, something that's not just good, but better than the Wesley Snipes Blade films. And that's the real challenge, because those first two Blade movies are top tier. It's going to be really hard to top them. That's also been Marvel's other big holdup. They don't want to put out a Blade movie that feels significantly weaker than Wesley Snipes' version, especially when Snipes himself is right there, ready and willing to return, but they're choosing not to use him. Mahershala Ali's Blade was originally meant to set up a Midnight Suns movie, where a group of supernatural characters would team up against Lilith. Now that Marvel is fast-tracking Midnight Suns, it looks like they might just be shifting focus entirely. Instead of forcing a solo Blade movie, they could bring him back as part of this bigger supernatural crossover, alongside Moon Knight, Werewolf by Night, Ghost Rider, and other characters who don't typically fit into a traditional Avengers lineup. Lilith was supposed to be the main villain, which makes sense since she was the first major threat the Midnight Suns faced in the comics. She was originally set to debut in Blade, played by Mia Goth, and since she's still attached to the role, she could easily carry over into Midnight Suns. And funny enough, in the MCU, Agatha Harkness once interviewed Lilith for a different movie she was working on. If they both end up appearing in Midnight Suns, it'd be a full circle moment. Wesley Snipes seems to have realized that Marvel wasn't really interested in bringing him back for Blade, or involving him in Mahershala Ali's version at all. It sounds like there were no secret talks behind the scenes. Marvel just wasn't considering him. Ryan Reynolds, however, has been vocal about Snipes' impact, calling him the godfather of both the Fox Marvel universe and the MCU. In his post, he points out that neither of those cinematic universes would exist if the original Blade movie hadn't been such a massive hit in the 90s. And he's absolutely right. That film proved to studio executives that a shared cinematic universe for comic book movies was actually possible. Let me know what you think in the comments. What should Marvel do with Blade? Whether it's Mahershala Ali, Wesley Snipes, or any other version of the character, how would you like to see him return if this new Blade movie never happens? Personally, I'd be fine if we never got another Blade solo film, as long as they bring him back in great projects. Something like Midnight Suns sounds like an awesome idea, if they can nail the script. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if, a few years down the line, Marvel announces that Wesley Snipes and Ryan Reynolds have joined the Blade project as executive producers, turning it into some kind of Blade legacy project. Whatever happens, I'll be covering all the latest updates as soon as we get more news. We'll probably see at least 4 or 5 more Chair Watch updates over the next couple of years, especially with Avengers, Doomsday, and Secret Wars on the horizon. You know the chairs will be back for Secret Wars. We'll definitely get another one of these before it's all said and done. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Whatever happens, I'll be covering all the latest updates as soon as we get more news.